Hey folks, I am Kevin Iole. Welcome to Yahoo Sports. The big fight is on Saturday night. Unfortunately, we're not going to get Errol Spence against Manny Pacquiao, but we got the next best thing. Manny Pacquiao, and what could be his last fight, is going up against Yordenis Ugas for a WBA title. There are so many WBA titles that I don't really give it all that much credit, but it is for a championship. Joining me right now is one of the best trainers in the world, Stephen Breadman Edwards. He's going to help me break it down. Brett, how you doing, my friend?
I'm good. How you doing, Kevin? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I appreciate you joining me. First of all, I think this is the really intriguing thing in the fight. Manny Pacquiao spends 8 weeks in training camp preparing for Errol Spence, a left-hander. And left-handers don't see left-handers all that often. Now, all of a sudden, with about 8 days before the fight, it gets switched, and he's going to fight a right-hander in Ugas. Does that make any, special problems for Freddie Roach and Manny?
I wouldn't consider it a special problem for a guy like Manny, who's been around over 20 years and has over 70 fights. There's a readjustment. Obviously, Freddie probably has to turn around on the pads because he was hitting the pads probably in a southpaw stance. This is what I'm guessing.
Right.
Obviously, you got to get all of the sparring out and get the new sparring in. And every fighter has tendencies. You may not have weaknesses, but you have tendencies. So obviously Errol Spence and Ugas, they fight different. So they have to kind of like study a little film and pick up some tendencies and things like that. But Manny does great with right-handed fighters. I think the biggest adjustment, in my opinion, is mentally. Older fighters, oftentimes they take really tough fights and the public says stuff to them, like, why is he taking this fight? And the reason why is they've been around so long is that they don't get up for just any fight.
Right.
Errol Spence is a major challenge to Pacquiao. He's a guy that was favored to beat Pacquiao, and a lot of people favored him to stop Pacquiao. He's a top 5 pound for pound fighter in the world. And I could remember Ray Leonard, talking about the Hagler fight, saying, he wouldn't have got up for tune-ups. He had to have that kind of challenge in front of him.
We feel like Kevin Howard and guys like that he didn't get up. He got knocked down himself.
And if you hear, Roy Jones talk, a little bit later in his career, he would, if you listen to somebody long enough, they'll tell you the truth. And Roy Jones would constantly say, I have to get up for certain fights. Manny Pacquiao lives in the Philippines. He has to come over here, leave his family, work his butt off, get in shape, had these boxing these bigger guys in the gym, going through all of the tasks of a training camp. You just don't get up for anybody. So I'm just hoping that I think that the mental part of getting up for Ugas, not that Ugas is not an excellent fighter, because he is, but he's not Errol Spence. And there's a difference. Errol Spence is undefeated. He has the prestige of being an Olympian. He's a top pound for pound guy. There's just a different threat level. It doesn't mean that Ugas is not threatening. Doesn't mean he can't beat Manny. It just means that the perception of Ugas is different than the perception of Errol Spence. So, the technical stuff, you can work that out. They both had the same time to get prepared for each other. But mentally, I think that this favors Ugas because this is a Super Bowl for Ugas. This is a fight like Manny Pacquiao is a living legend. He's the most popular fighter in the sport of boxing today, along with Canelo. And to get this opportunity, he's going to be up for it mentally. And whenever you're dealing with an older fighter, you always wonder if they can get up for it mentally. So I think it's a much more of a mental task than a physical task.
Stephen, do you think, you look at Ugas, and he's not your typical Cuban fighter, right? I mean, a lot of the Cuban fighters, he used to be trained by Joel Casamayor, who was that typical, Cuban fighter. Now with Salas, and he doesn't necessarily fight that crazy Cuban style that, causes guys so many problems. Do you think that makes it easier for Manny in taking this fight? That I don't know that I would call Ugas conventional, but he's far more conventional than some other Cuban fighters.
He's far more into Manny's wheelhouse. He brings the fight. He's more aggressive. He comes forward. In that aspect, I agree. He doesn't seem like he's a huge puncher, but he's a strong puncher, and he's very strong physically. I noticed something, that he was able to back up Sean Porter, who's a really strong guy. And if you watch that fight, Ugas was actually the one pressing forward. So I expect him to be really, really strong physically. At the same time, it's a little easier to hit him than it is a guy like Rigondeaux or Casamayor or Lara. So, there's pros and cons to that. Also, as good as Manny is, Manny doesn't really fight on the inside.
Right.
Kind of his outside, he jumps in and out.
Right.
So a lot of times people equate an inside fighter with a short fighter, but Manny doesn't really work on the inside. He's on the outside and he jumps in and then he jumps back out. Ugas actually has an inside game, and he also has variety on his right hand, which is kind of like, can throw a southpaw off because he can throw it straight. He can loop it. He has like this looping shot. He hit, I think it was Ray Robinson in one of his fights against the southpaw. Ugas is a clever, interesting guy. I favor Manny also, but this is a real fight. If Manny, for as great as Manny is, he didn't have his best night against Jeff Horn. I thought that Manny won the fight, but it wasn't it wasn't Mike Fox versus Maestro. It was a close fight. Jeff Horn did some good things in there against Manny, and I consider that Ugas is a better fighter than Jeff Horn. So I expect Manny to have a tough time come Saturday night.
If you were game planning for Ugas, what do you tell him to do? What are the 2 or 3 things that he needs to accomplish to win the fight?
I think he has to use his jab to offset Manny's rhythm. Manny has that in and out rhythm. If you notice, he doesn't score many knockouts anymore, but he hurts every single opponent early. He hits them with a shot that just shocks them. And the reason why is because his rhythm is so off. They don't have time to brace for the shot. It's almost like a sucker punch. So I think that early I would tell Ugas to establish his jab and just try to break Manny's rhythm up. Even if he's coming forward, don't over punch. Don't throw too much. Manny's seen so much stuff is where he'll run Ugas into a counter and hit him with a shot that he doesn't see. And if he doesn't knock Ugas out, what he'll do is have a big round, he'll drop him or he'll bust his face up or something, and then the judges are humans. It'll have a carryover effect. Right. And every time he punches, what'll happen is the crowd will go absolutely nuts. He did it with Keith Thurman. He hit Adrian Broner with a couple of shots, then buckled Broner a little bit. Every time he punches, the crowd goes crazy. So you don't want to get the crowd so crazy for Manny as where that the rounds are having the carryover effect, because Kevin, for some reason, nobody knows how to judge a fight anymore. It's 12 individual rounds.
It's 12 fights, not one fight.
Yeah, it's 12 individual rounds, and you'll hear somebody say, "Oh, that guy had a big last round, or he scored a knockdown." It's one round. You know what I'm saying? And it's so weird. And when you're a guy like Manny who has that charisma and that star power, and the crowd going crazy for everything you do, that's a real thing.
The judges default to him if it's close.
Yes. So I would tell Ugas to establish his jab, to try to break Manny's rhythm, to try to see if he could find a way to time Manny on an in and out rhythm. It took Marquez 4 fights, but it's not impossible. Manny has that in and out little bounce.
A little hop that he does that. Yeah. I mean, do you have to kind of figure that hop out?
Yeah. A jab will break that up. And believe it or not, as weird as this may sound, if I'm Ugas, I try to back Manny up to the ropes if I can. It's risky, but
what would the advantage be of him doing that?
Well, the advantage would be is when you're up against the ropes, you don't have anywhere else to go. Right. So what it does is it takes that rhythm away. It takes a little bit of the rhythm away because you're up against the ropes. If you think about it, you get a guy that has that quirky, bouncy style, and you put him up against the ropes. That's difficult for them to be able to bounce in and out and be able to move, because one of his gifts is his feet. And if you're pinning them up against the ropes and holding them there, then you can kind of offset that a little bit. And again, if you watch Manny work, how many guys have actually put Manny up against the ropes? It's very, 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 very difficult. I think Jeff Horn may have been the best who's done it throughout his career, because Morales and Barrera and Marquez, they couldn't. They had to fight him a different way. They didn't have the physical strength to really put him up against the ropes. So, that would be my game plan for Ugas. But the number one thing is to establish his jab and break Manny's rhythm. He's a bigger, longer guy. Don't just wade in. Go behind a good jab to establish. Not even so much hitting Manny with it, but just like we call it in the gym, throwing dirt in his eyes. Just throw a little dirt in his eyes just to offset him just to try to distract him a little bit so Manny doesn't jump in and hit him with one of those shots that he doesn't see. For as good as Keith Thurman is an excellent fighter. And, Manny, that victory is one of the best wins you're ever going to get. But Keith Thurman don't jab. He moves around, he jumps in. So he allowed Manny to get his rhythm. He doesn't use a jab.
Right.
People can say what they want about Floyd, but if you watch that fight, Floyd didn't get greedy. His dad was telling him constantly, you can knock this guy out, you can do this. Floyd's looking at him like, man, no, if you open up on this guy, you can get clipped and get knocked out yourself. He didn't listen to what his dad was telling him. If you listen to the instruction, his dad was frustrated with him, like, you can knock him out. And Floyd's like whatever. I'm not going to be in there exchanging with that guy. Floyd kept it safe. He kept Manny on the end of the jab. Every once in a while, he'd land the right hand. He kept him in his place and he used his length. And when Manny got close, he tied him up. It was a really, really smart game plan. People got criticized for it. I mean, he got criticized by people for it, but that was his best bet to win. Ugas doesn't have the reflexes or the boxing ability of Floyd that Floyd does. So he can't duplicate that exact style. You got to be yourself in there. But the number one punch that Floyd threw in that fight was a jab. He really offset Manny with a jab, and he broke that timing up and allowed him to get Manny on the end of his right hand. So I think, I think Ugas has to establish his jab, break the rhythm, try to push him in the ropes, and don't overcommit, don't overpunch. The more you overpunch with Manny has developed into a master counterpuncher these days. You can throw a jab, he slides his head off to his right and he shoots his left hand as you're shooting your jab, and your jab goes over his shoulder and he hits you with a straight left hand. It's a beautiful move that he does. He does it to right-handed fighters all the time. So you can't overpunch with him because he's seen so much. He's so relaxed in the ring. He's a master at this point. He's fought every style, he's fought everybody. So you can't overpunch and give him too much because he'll compute it. The next thing you know, he'll be running you in the shots that you're not expecting.
Well, let's say you're Freddie Roach then, and Ugas takes your advice and he's keeping that jab going. He's trying to back Manny up. What do you tell Manny to do if in fact that's happening?
If that happens, Manny's gonna have to hold his ground and press the fight. And as good as Manny is right now, he doesn't come forward as good as he goes backwards anymore. He kind of wants you to come to him now because he's a little older and his legs are a little different. And
he hasn't fought for 2 years, so is that a factor?
Yeah. So if Ugas can score points and win rounds from long range, Manny and Freddie Roach are gonna have a hard night in front of him. That'll be really tough, and Manny has to literally go get him. One of the things that drove Manny crazy about Marquez is Marquez wouldn't lead. He just wouldn't lead. He would just feint, and just make Manny lead, and it drove Manny crazy. Manny is one of the best fighters I've ever seen, but I think at this point in his life, he would rather you come to him than he have to go get you.
You're right.
So Ugas can back him up without overcommitting. I think the onus is on Ugas to make this fight competitive. Manny's the better natural fighter. He has the more God-given ability. So if Ugas is just standing in his wheelhouse and his reflex for reflex, punch for punch, he can't beat Manny. Manny's more gifted. God gave him more things to work with. But with the right game plan, Ugas can make this fight close or possibly win a decision, in my opinion.
So in 30 seconds, give me your pick on the fight. Who wins and how?
Manny Pacquiao wins this fight 7-5 decision, unanimous decision. I was going to say a late stoppage because I noticed Ugas' face bust up, but Manny hasn't stopped anybody except for Matisse in the last few years.
One stop. I wrote it in my betting column, Stephen. One stoppage in 11 plus years.
Yes, I think, and the last one before that was Cotto in 2009. Yeah, so I've seen probably 30 of Manny Pacquiao's fights. He used to be a knockout machine in the 2000s. So I'll say Manny Pacquiao 7-5 decision, tad of controversy, but it's clean enough where it's not a robbery.
Awesome. We appreciate it so much, Stephen Breadman Edwards, one of the best trainers in boxing. What do you got coming up recently? Soon?
I just had Cassius Chaney, heavyweight. He's 21-0 now. He just fought Saturday night. I have a 5-0 kid named Romero Cruz. He fights on August the 28th. And I'm waiting for fights right now for Zachary Ochoa and Karan Davis. Karan Davis is just coming off a draw with Anthony Durrell. I thought I'll have a fight for him by now. I've been hearing some names, Darenchenko, a couple other guys, the kid Berlanga. So I'm just waiting so we're staying in the gym so we can just get things rolling. That's it, really, just staying in the gym, trying to wait things out.
You're one of the best out there, my man. I appreciate you. Thank you for the time, and all the best to you.
Appreciate you. Thank you.